I never believed in curses until I inherited my grandmother's ruby ring, and by then, it was already too late to save myself from the supernatural hell that followed. The ring that sits in my safe deposit box right now, yes, I still have it, though I'll never touch it again, has killed 7 people in my family over the past 80 years, and I was supposed to be the 8th. If you're watching this video alone at night, maybe you should turn on some lights, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you look at family heirlooms forever. My grandmother, Elena Marchetti, died on a Tuesday in October 2023 in her small house in Salem, Massachusetts. She was 91 years old and had been the keeper of our family's most precious possession for over 6 decades, a stunning antique ruby ring that had been in our Italian family since the 1800s. The ring was absolutely beautiful, I'll give it that. The center stone was a deep red ruby about the size of a dime, surrounded by tiny diamonds set in what appeared to be white gold or platinum. The band was delicate but sturdy, with intricate engravings that looked like tiny flowers and vines wrapping around the metal. When light hit it just right, the ruby seemed to glow with an inner fire that was both mesmerizing and somehow unsettling. Hit the like button if you're already getting chills, because this is just the beginning of the most terrifying experience of my life. I remember the day I first saw the ring clearly. I was 28 years old, living in Boston, working as a marketing consultant for tech companies. My life was pretty normal. Apartment in Back Bay, decent job, dating a girl named Sarah who I was getting serious about. I had driven up to Salem that crisp October morning to help clean out my grandmother's house after her funeral. My mom, my Aunt Lisa, and I were going through Elena's belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. It's always surreal, going through a deceased person's possessions. Every object tells a story, holds a memory, represents a piece of someone's life that's now over. We were in my grandmother's bedroom going through her jewelry box when my Aunt Lisa pulled out a small, ornate wooden box I'd never seen before. The box itself was beautiful. Dark wood with mother-of-pearl inlay forming intricate patterns across the lid. When she opened it, there was the ring sitting on faded red velvet, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees the moment that box opened. My mom actually shivered and pulled her cardigan tighter around herself. This was supposed to be passed down to the eldest daughter in each generation, my Aunt Lisa said, her voice strangely quiet. But Elena never had daughters, and neither did I. I guess it goes to you, Michael. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it relief? Fear? Maybe both. My mom was unusually quiet as Lisa placed the ring in my palm. The moment the metal touched my skin, I felt this strange tingling sensation, like a mild electric shock that ran up my arm and straight to my chest. The ring was surprisingly heavy for its size, and cold, not just cool, but actually cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. The ruby caught the afternoon light coming through Elena's bedroom window, and for just a second, I could have sworn I saw something moving inside the stone. Not just light refracting, but actual movement, like smoke swirling in deep red water. There's something you should know about that ring, my mom finally said, sitting down heavily on the edge of Elena's bed. She looked tired, older than her 62 years. It's been in our family for a very long time, and it's had a troubled history. Let me know in the comments if you've ever inherited something that gave you an immediate bad feeling, because I should have listened to my instincts right then and there. My Aunt Lisa shot my mom a warning look, but my mom continued anyway. Your great-great-grandmother, Sophia, brought it with her when she immigrated from Italy in 1924. The story goes that she got it from her mother, who got it from her mother before that. It was supposed to be a family blessing, something to protect the women of our bloodline. But, she paused, looking down at her hands. Every woman who's worn it has died young, Michael. Violently, unexpectedly. I almost laughed. The rational part of my mind, the part that had a business degree and prided itself on logical thinking, immediately dismissed this as old family superstition. Italian families are notorious for their dramatic stories and supernatural beliefs. I figured this was just another case of confirmation bias, where people remembered the bad things that happened and attributed them to supernatural causes while forgetting all the perfectly normal, uneventful times. Come on, Mom, I said, slipping the ring onto my pinky finger. It was the only finger small enough for the delicate band. That's just coincidence. People used to die young all the time back then. Disease, accidents, childbirth complications. You can't blame a piece of jewelry for random tragedies. The moment the ring settled onto my finger, fully in place, the house went completely silent. Not just quiet, silent. The autumn wind that had been rustling the leaves outside stopped. The old heating system that had been humming in the background clicked off. Even the distant traffic noise from the street seemed to disappear. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Then I heard it, a sound like a woman crying, very faintly, coming from somewhere inside the walls. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds, just long enough for all 3 of us to exchange glances and confirm we'd all heard the same thing. My Aunt Lisa went pale, actually pale, like someone had drained the blood from her face. "Take it off," she whispered urgently. "Take it off right now." But when I tried to remove the ring, it wouldn't budge. It wasn't stuck in the traditional sense. There was no swelling, no soap needed, nothing physically preventing it from sliding off my finger. It simply refused to move, as if it had somehow fused with my skin. I twisted it, pulled it, even tried using some hand lotion my grandmother had on her nightstand, but nothing worked. The ring sat on my pinky finger like it had always been there, like it belonged there. "This is impossible," I muttered, continuing to struggle with the ring. It went on easily. It should come off easily. My mom was now standing next to me, also trying to help remove the ring, but neither of us could get it to move even a millimeter. It was like the ring had decided it was staying put, and there was nothing we could do about it. "This happened to your great-aunt Margaret in 1967, my Aunt Lisa said quietly. "The ring wouldn't come off for 3 weeks. She died in a car accident on the 21st day of wearing it." Share this video with someone who loves supernatural stories because you're going to want someone to discuss this with. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying everything we could think of to remove the ring. Ice water to shrink my finger, soap, oil, even dental floss to try to work it off gradually. Nothing worked. The ring seemed to have developed a supernatural grip on my finger, and as the hours passed, I started to notice other strange things happening around me. First, the temperature drops. Wherever I went in my grandmother's house, the air would suddenly become noticeably colder. Not drafty cold, but the kind of supernatural cold you feel in your bones, the kind that makes you shiver even when you're wearing a heavy coat. My mom and aunt noticed it too. They kept commenting on how chilly the house seemed, even though the heating system was working perfectly. Second, the sounds. Throughout the afternoon, we kept hearing things that shouldn't be there. Footsteps in empty rooms, doors closing when no one was near them. That crying sound I'd heard earlier came back several times, always faint, always seeming to come from inside the walls or from rooms we weren't in. At one point, I distinctly heard someone call my name, a woman's voice speaking in what sounded like Italian, but when I went to investigate, there was no one there. By evening, I was seriously starting to worry, not about supernatural nonsense, but about the practical problem of having a ring stuck on my finger. I was supposed to fly back to Boston the next day for work, and the last thing I needed was to spend time in emergency rooms trying to get jewelry cut off. I called my doctor's office, but they were closed for the day. I even looked up 24-hour urgent care centers in the Salem area, planning to drive over and have them cut the ring off if necessary. But something stopped me from making that trip. Every time I started to head for the door, every time I picked up my car keys, I would get this overwhelming feeling of dread. Not anxiety about the medical procedure, but genuine terror. Like something horrible would happen if I tried to have the ring removed by force. The feeling was so strong, so undeniably present, that I couldn't ignore it. It was like my subconscious mind was screaming at me that cutting off the ring would be a terrible mistake. So I decided to wait. I figured whatever was causing the ring to stick would resolve itself overnight, and I'd be able to remove it normally in the morning. I drove back to my apartment in Boston that evening, with the ring still firmly attached to my finger, telling myself that everything would be back to normal by tomorrow. Comment below if you think I should have forced the ring off that first day, because looking back, that might have been my only chance to avoid what happened next. That night was the first night the dreams started. I've always been a pretty sound sleeper. 8 hours, rarely any nightmares, usually wake up feeling refreshed. But that night, I had the most vivid, terrifying dreams I'd ever experienced in my life. I dreamed I was in an old house, much older than my grandmother's place, with dark wood walls and floors that creaked with every step. The house felt ancient, European, like something you'd see in a period movie about medieval times. In the dream, I was wearing a long dress. I'm a man, so this was already weird. And the ruby ring was on my finger, but much larger, much more prominent than in real life. I could feel the weight of it pulling my hand down, and when I looked at it, the ruby was glowing with its own light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The house was full of shadows that moved independently of any light source, and I could hear voices speaking in Italian, multiple women's voices all talking at once, getting louder and more agitated as the dream continued. I woke up around 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like I just run a marathon. The ring was still on my finger, and in the dim light from my bedroom window, I could swear the ruby was still faintly glowing, though that might have been my imagination influenced by the dream. I got up to get some water and checked the locks on my apartment. Completely irrational behavior, since I lived on the 4th floor of a secure building, but the dream had left me feeling genuinely unsafe. The next morning, I felt terrible, exhausted, on edge, like I was coming down with the flu. I called in sick to work, something I almost never do, and spent most of the day researching my family history online. If this ring really had been passed down through generations, there should be some record of it, some documentation of the women who had owned it before. What I found in the online genealogy databases and Italian immigration records made my blood run cold, and it's when I realized that my family's supernatural story might not be as ridiculous as I'd initially thought. Paragraph 2. The research and escalation. 2,000 words. The deeper I dug into my family's history, the more terrified I became, because the pattern of deaths connected to this ring was not only real, it was methodical, predictable, and apparently unstoppable. I spent 3 days straight researching, barely sleeping, barely eating, completely obsessed with finding out the truth about what was now permanently attached to my finger. By the end of that research period, I had documented 7 deaths over the past century, all connected to women who had worn this exact ring, and all occurring within weeks of them putting it on. Let me know in the comments if you've ever gone down a research rabbit hole that completely changed your understanding of reality, because that's exactly what happened to me. My great-great-grandmother, Sophia Marchetti, brought the ring to America in 1924 when she was just 19 years old. According to the Ellis Island immigration records, she arrived alone from a small village near Naples, carrying only a single suitcase and wearing the ruby ring. The immigration documents listed her as single, but by 1925 she was married to Antonio Benedetto, and by 1926 she had given birth to my great-grandmother, Rosa. Everything seemed normal, typical immigrant success story, until I found Sophia's death certificate from 1927. Sophia died at age 22 from what the death certificate listed as accidental drowning in the Charles River in Boston. But here's what made my hands shake as I read this document. The police report, which I found in the Boston Public Library's newspaper archives, stated that she was found wearing only a ruby ring when they pulled her body from the water. Her clothes, her shoes, even her wedding band were never found. It was as if she had walked into the river fully clothed, and everything except the ruby ring had simply disappeared. The next owner was my great-grandmother, Rosa, who inherited the ring after her mother's death. Rosa lived with it for several years without incident, but according to family letters I found in my grandmother Elena's papers, Rosa never actually wore the ring. She kept it in a jewelry box and told people it was too valuable and too painful a reminder of her mother's tragic death. Rosa lived to be 64, dying of natural causes in 1968. She had passed the ring to her daughter, my grandmother Elena's older sister, Margaret. Margaret's story was the one my Aunt Lisa had mentioned. Margaret wore the ring for exactly 21 days in 1967, and during those 3 weeks, her life completely fell apart. I found newspaper clippings about her death in Elena's house. Apparently, my grandmother had been keeping track of this pattern for decades. Margaret's husband left her after 2 weeks of what he described to reporters as impossible behavior and supernatural incidents in their house. Neighbors complained about strange noises, screaming and flashing lights coming from the Margaret's house at all hours of the night. Margaret died when her car went off the road on Route 1 in Saugus, Massachusetts. The police report stated that there were no other vehicles involved, no mechanical problems with the car, and no evidence of medical emergency like a heart attack or seizure. The car simply veered off the road at high speed and hit a tree. Margaret was found dead at the scene, wearing the ruby ring. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories like this, because the pattern only gets more disturbing from here. After Margaret's death, the ring went back to my grandmother Elena, who had apparently learned from her sister's experience. According to the notes I found in Elena's handwriting, she never wore the ring, not even once. She kept it locked in the wooden box I had seen, and she spent decades researching the ring's history, trying to understand what was happening to the women in our family. Elena's research was far more thorough than mine. She had traced the ring back to Italy and discovered that it had belonged to a woman named Caterina de Santo, who lived in Naples in the 1890s. Caterina had been accused of witchcraft by the local Catholic Church and was killed by an angry mob in 1898. According to the Italian church records Elena had somehow obtained, Katerina was wearing the ruby ring when she died, and her final words were a curse on any woman who would ever wear it after her death. The ring had somehow made its way from Katerina's dead body to my great-great-grandmother Sophia, though Elena's notes didn't specify exactly how. What was clear from the documentation was that every woman who had worn the ring since 1898 had died violent, unexpected deaths within weeks of putting it on. Elena's notes contained a list. Caterina de Santo, 1898, beaten to death by mob. Sophia Marchetti, 1927, drowned in Charles River. Margaret Benedetto, 1967, car accident, and several other names with dates and causes of death, all Italian women, all violent deaths. Elena had calculated that the ring had killed at least 12 women over the past 125 years, and she was determined that she would be the last. Her solution was simple: never wear it, never let anyone else wear it, and hope the curse would die with her. But now it was on my finger, and I was starting to understand that being male might not protect me from whatever supernatural force was attached to this ring. Comment below what you think I should have done at this point, because I was starting to realize that normal solutions weren't going to work. By the 4th day of wearing the ring, the supernatural activity in my apartment was becoming impossible to ignore. It started with small things: lights flickering, the temperature dropping suddenly in specific rooms, electronics turning on and off by themselves. I would come home from running errands to find my laptop open and displaying web pages about death, accidents, and supernatural curses, even though I was certain I had shut it down before leaving. Then the sound started. The same woman's voice I had heard at Elena's house, speaking in Italian, always when I was alone. The voice seemed to come from inside the walls, or sometimes from right behind me, but when I turned around, there was never anyone there. I started keeping my phone ready to record these incidents, but every time I tried to capture the voice, the recording would come out completely silent, even though I could hear the speaking clearly in real time. My girlfriend Sarah noticed the changes in me before I did. She said I looked exhausted, stressed, and that I was acting paranoid and jumpy. She was right. I was jumping at every unexpected sound, constantly looking over my shoulder and having trouble concentrating on anything except the ring and the research about my family's deaths. "You've been obsessed with that ring since your grandmother died," Sarah said during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "You won't talk about anything else, you barely sleep, and you keep talking about curses and supernatural nonsense. This isn't like you, Michael, you're scaring me." I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you explain to someone that you're wearing a cursed ring that has killed multiple people and won't come off your finger? She was a rational person, a software engineer who dealt in facts and logic. If I told her the truth, she would either think I was having a mental breakdown or that I was becoming dangerously delusional. But I was starting to realize that maybe I didn't have a choice about telling people, because the supernatural activity was escalating beyond just affecting me personally. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because I was about to discover that this curse wasn't just targeting the person wearing the ring. 1 week after putting on the ring, Sarah stayed over at my apartment for the weekend. Saturday night, we were watching a movie when every piece of electronic equipment in my living room turned on simultaneously. The TV, the stereo, my PlayStation, my laptop, even the coffee maker in the kitchen. Everything just powered up at once, creating a cacophony of different sounds and flashing lights. Sarah jumped up from the couch, clearly startled. "What the hell was that?" she asked, looking around the room in confusion. I didn't have an answer that would make sense to her, so I mumbled something about electrical problems in the building and started turning everything off. But as soon as I shut down one device, another would turn itself back on. It took nearly 10 minutes to get all the electronics to stay off, and during that entire time, I could feel the ring getting colder and colder on my finger until it was so cold it was almost painful. That night, Sarah had the first nightmare. She woke up around 2 a.m., gasping and shaking, telling me about a dream where she was drowning in a river, while a woman in old-fashioned clothes stood on the shore, laughing. In the dream, the woman was wearing a ruby ring that glowed like fire, and she was speaking in a language Sarah didn't understand, but somehow knew was threatening and evil. "The woman in the dream looked like you," Sarah told me, her voice still shaky from the nightmare. Same facial structure, same eyes, but it was definitely a woman, and she was wearing this long dress from like the 1920s or something. And that ring, Michael, it looked exactly like the ring you've been wearing all week. I held Sarah until she fell back asleep, but I stayed awake for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling and feeling the ring pulse with what I was now certain was supernatural energy. The ring wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was targeting people close to me, people I cared about. and that realization filled me with a terror I'd never experienced before. The next morning, Sarah woke up with scratches on her arms. 3 parallel scratches on each forearm, like claw marks, deep enough to have drawn blood but not deep enough to need medical attention. She claimed she must have scratched herself during the nightmare, but I could see that the scratches were too precise, too symmetrical to be self-inflicted. They looked deliberate, purposeful, like something had marked her while she slept. "I think you should stay at your own place for a while," I told Sarah over breakfast, trying to keep my voice calm and casual. "I've been stressed about work and family stuff, and I think I need some space to sort things out." Sarah looked hurt and confused, but she agreed to give me some time alone. As I watched her pack her things and leave my apartment, I knew I was probably losing the best relationship I'd ever had, but I also knew that keeping her around was putting her in supernatural danger that she couldn't understand or protect herself from. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because what happened after Sarah left was when the real terror began. That evening, alone in my apartment, I decided to try one more time to remove the ring using every method I could think of. I filled a bowl with ice water and soaked my hand for 20 minutes to shrink my finger as much as possible. I used soap, oil, butter, even WD-40 spray lubricant. I tried twisting the ring while pulling, using rubber gloves for better grip, even wrapping dental floss around my finger above the ring to compress the tissue. Nothing worked. The ring sat on my finger like it had been soldered there, completely immovable despite every technique I tried. But worse than the ring not moving was what happened every time I attempted to remove it. The supernatural activity in my apartment would intensify dramatically. During my ring removal attempts, every mirror in my apartment would fog up even though the temperature was normal. The fog would form patterns that looked almost like writing, symbols or letters in a language I didn't recognize. But before I could photograph them or figure out what they meant, the fog would clear and the mirrors would return to normal. The woman's voice became more frequent and more urgent. Instead of just occasional whispers, I was now hearing full sentences in Italian, sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered, coming from different locations around my apartment. I downloaded an Italian translation app on my phone and managed to record a few words that I could identify: mio, mine, mort, death, and vendetta, revenge. The temperature drops were becoming extreme. My apartment would go from normal room temperature to what felt like refrigerator cold in a matter of seconds, and the cold spots would move around the apartment like someone invisible was walking from room to room. I started wearing a heavy sweatshirt indoors, but even bundled up, I would still shiver uncontrollably when the supernatural cold hit. By the end of that second week wearing the ring, I had lost 15 pounds, was sleeping maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, and was beginning to see things that definitely weren't there. Shadows that moved independently of any light source, figures in my peripheral vision that would disappear when I turned to look directly, and occasionally, just for a split second, the reflection of a woman in my bathroom mirror standing behind me when no one else was in the apartment. I was also starting to understand that the ring wasn't just cursed, it was inhabited by something intelligent, something that was very angry, and something that was building up to a final confrontation that I was probably not going to survive. Paragraph 3. The supernatural manifestations intensify, 2,000 words. By the third week of wearing the ring, the supernatural entity that had attached itself to this cursed jewelry was no longer content with subtle manifestations. It wanted direct contact, and it was becoming increasingly aggressive in its attempts to communicate with me or control me. The experiences I'm about to describe tested every rational belief I had about reality, and honestly, if someone had told me these things before they happened to me, I would have recommended they seek professional help. But when you're living through genuine paranormal activity, when you're being targeted by something supernatural that wants to harm you, skepticism becomes a luxury you can't afford. Hit the like button if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, because the supernatural encounters were about to become terrifyingly real. It started with the physical manifestations. Objects in my apartment began moving on their own, not just falling over or sliding, but moving in ways that defied gravity and physics. I would come home from work to find all my kitchen cabinets open, not just unlocked, but completely opened, as if someone had gone through every single one looking for something specific. My books would be pulled off the shelves and arranged in neat piles on the floor, always in the same pattern, 7 piles with 7 books each, forming a rough circle in the center of my living room. The number 7 kept appearing everywhere. 7 items moved from their original locations, 7 minutes of strange noises at exactly 3:07 a.m. every night, 7 scratches appearing on surfaces where none had been before. I researched the significance of 7 in supernatural contexts and found that it's considered a number of spiritual completion, often associated with both divine intervention and demonic activity. Given my family's history with the ring, I was pretty sure we weren't dealing with the divine intervention variety. But the moving objects were just the beginning. The entity, and I was now certain it was a specific entity, not just random paranormal energy, began appearing to me directly. The first visual manifestation happened on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. I was brushing my teeth in my bathroom when I saw her in the mirror, a woman in her 20s with long, dark hair and olive skin, wearing what looked like a dress from the early 1900s. She was standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have been able to feel her breath on my neck, but when I spun around, there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, she was still there in the reflection, but now she was pointing at the ring on my finger and speaking in rapid Italian. Her mouth was moving, and I could see the intensity in her eyes, but I couldn't hear any sound. It was like watching a silent movie, except this movie was happening in my bathroom mirror while I was trying to get ready for work. Comment below if you think I should have tried to communicate with the entity, because that's exactly what I decided to do next. I started researching methods for communicating with spirits, feeling absolutely ridiculous but also desperate for answers. I bought a Ouija board from a local occult shop, downloaded spirit communication apps on my phone, even tried old-fashioned methods like automatic writing and meditation. Most of these attempts produced nothing useful, but the Ouija board sessions were different and terrifying. The first time I used the Ouija board alone in my apartment, the planchette moved immediately to spell out Caterina, the name of the woman from Italy that my grandmother Elena had identified in her research. Over the course of several sessions, I was able to piece together more of the story. Caterina de Santo had been falsely accused of witchcraft in 1890s Naples because she was a widow who owned property and refused to remarry. The local men wanted her land, and the easiest way to get it was to have her declared a witch and executed. According to the Ouija board communications, Caterina had cursed the ring with her dying breath, binding her spirit to it so that she could take revenge on the world that had destroyed her. Every woman who wore the ring would experience Caterina's death, drowning, violence, accidents, because Caterina wanted others to suffer as she had suffered. The curse was her way of ensuring that her rage would live on long after her body was dead. But here's where the story took an unexpected turn. Caterina told me through the Ouija board that she hadn't expected the ring to end up being worn by a man. The curse was specifically designed to target women, and my wearing it had somehow confused or altered the supernatural mechanism. Instead of killing me quickly like she had killed the women, Caterina was trapped in a kind of spiritual limbo, unable to complete her revenge, but also unable to move on to whatever comes after death. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because Caterina's confusion about my gender was about to make the situation much more dangerous. The Ouija board sessions revealed that Caterina was becoming increasingly frustrated with the situation. She had been bound to the ring for over a century, reliving her death over and over, watching other women die because of her curse, but never finding the peace or justice she was seeking. My wearing the ring had disrupted her pattern, and she was desperate to either complete the curse or find another way to end her supernatural imprisonment. During one particularly intense Ouija session, Caterina spelled out, "Bring me women," over and over again, moving the planchette so aggressively that it flew off the board entirely. The message was clear. She wanted me to find women to wear the ring so she could continue her supernatural revenge. When I refused, explaining through the board that I wouldn't be responsible for anyone else's death, the paranormal activity in my apartment escalated to a level that was genuinely frightening. The temperature drops became so extreme that I could see my breath indoors. Frost would form on the inside of my windows even on warm days. The water in my apartment would turn ice cold without warning, not just cool, but actually freezing cold, making showers impossible and turning drinking water into a shock to the system. I started buying bottled water and heating it on the stove for basic hygiene, living like I was camping rather than in a modern apartment. The sounds became constant and varied. Footsteps pacing back and forth in rooms where no one was walking, doors slamming when no wind could have moved them, and most disturbing of all, the sound of a woman crying inconsolably, sometimes for hours at a time. The crying would start suddenly, usually late at night, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. My neighbors began complaining to the building management about noise coming from my apartment, but when the maintenance workers came to investigate, the sounds would stop completely. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in this situation. because I was quickly running out of rational options and starting to consider some truly desperate measures. The visual manifestations of Katerina became more frequent and more detailed. She would appear not just in mirrors, but standing in my living room, sitting at my kitchen table, even lying in my bed next to me when I woke up in the middle of the night. Each time I saw her, she looked more solid, more real, as if she was gaining strength from my fear and desperation. Her clothing remained consistent, a long, dark dress with a high collar and long sleeves, typical of late 1800s fashion, but her emotional state varied dramatically. Sometimes she would appear calm, almost sad, standing quietly and watching me with expressions that seemed more curious than threatening. Other times, she would manifest in states of extreme agitation, pointing accusingly at me, gesturing wildly, and moving her mouth in what I assumed were Italian curses or demands. Her most terrifying appearances were when she would show up looking exactly as she must have looked when she died, bruised, bloodied, with rope marks around her neck from where the mob had hanged her. During these intense manifestations, electronic devices in my apartment would malfunction in specific ways. My television would turn on by itself and display nothing but static, but if I listened carefully to the white noise, I could sometimes make out words in Italian hidden in the electronic interference. My laptop would open web browsers and search for information about historical executions, witch trials, and methods of breaking supernatural curses, as if Katerina was trying to research solutions to our shared predicament. The most disturbing manifestation happened during my 4th week wearing the ring. I woke up at 3 a.m. to find Katerina sitting in the chair next to my bed, but this time she was completely solid, completely real-looking, not translucent or ghostly at all. She was leaning forward, staring directly at me, and when our eyes met, she spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "You cannot keep me trapped like this forever. I need to finish what was started, or I will make your life a living hell until you die of exhaustion and fear." Her voice was clear, strong, and absolutely terrifying in its matter-of-fact tone. This wasn't the voice of some distant spirit trying to communicate across supernatural barriers. This was the voice of someone sitting right next to me, having a conversation about my death as casually as discussing the weather. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and tried to respond. "What do you want from me? I didn't choose this. I never asked to wear your ring." Katerina smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had been dead for over a century and had spent that entire time planning revenge on the living. "Bring me women to kill, or I will kill everyone you care about, slowly, one by one, until you have nothing left but guilt and loneliness. Then I will kill you too, and we will both be trapped in this ring forever." Subscribe for more supernatural content if this story is giving you chills, because Katerina's threat wasn't just supernatural posturing, she meant every word. The next morning, I woke up to find that every mirror in my apartment had been shattered during the night, but not randomly broken. Each mirror had been cracked in the exact same pattern, a 7-pointed star with lines radiating out from the center. The glass fragments had fallen in perfect circles around each mirror, not scattered chaotically the way glass normally breaks. It was clearly supernatural intervention, and it was clearly a demonstration of Katerina's growing power. I called in sick to work again and spent the day researching methods for removing supernatural curses. The internet was full of contradictory information. Some sources said curses could only be broken by the person who cast them. Others claimed that specific rituals or religious interventions could work, and still others insisted that curses were psychological rather than supernatural and could be overcome through therapy and rational thinking. But I was way past the point of believing this was psychological. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Objects moving on their own, temperature changes that other people could feel, electronic malfunctions that could be documented, and most convincingly, Katerina's direct communication with me. Whatever was happening was definitely supernatural, and it was escalating towards some kind of final confrontation. Comment below what you think I should have done to break the curse, because I was about to try something desperate that could have gotten me killed. Paragraph 4. The confrontation and resolution. 2,000 words. By the beginning of my 5th week wearing the cursed ring, I had reached the point where I knew that either I was going to find a way to end this supernatural nightmare, or Katerina was going to make good on her threats to kill me and everyone I cared about. The paranormal activity had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and I was starting to understand that traditional methods of curse breaking weren't going to work in this situation. Katerina wasn't just some residual spiritual energy attached to an object. She was a fully conscious, intelligent entity with specific goals and the supernatural power to achieve them. The decision to confront Katerina directly came after she started targeting people in my life who had nothing to do with the ring or my family's history. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, who I had asked to stay away for her own safety, called me on a Tuesday morning in a state of absolute panic. "Michael, something is happening to me, and I think it's connected to that ring you were wearing," she said, her voice shaking with fear. "I've been having the same nightmare every night for a week, the drowning dream with the woman in the old dress. But now I'm having the dream even when I'm awake. I'll be at work, completely conscious, and suddenly I'm back in that river, fighting for my life while that woman watches me drown." Sarah went on to describe supernatural activity in her own apartment that mirrored what I had been experiencing. Objects moving on their own, temperature drops, electronic malfunctions, and most disturbing of all, the appearance of Katerina in her mirrors and reflections. The entity was somehow extending her influence beyond my immediate vicinity to target people I had emotional connections with. "She told me that you're keeping her prisoner," Sarah continued. "She said that if you don't give her what she wants, she's going to kill me first, then work her way through everyone you care about until you cooperate. Michael, I don't understand what's happening, but I believe that woman is real, and I believe she's going to hurt me if you don't do something." That phone call was my breaking point. I could accept the risk to myself. I had inherited this curse, I was wearing the ring, and in some way I was responsible for the situation. But I absolutely could not accept Katerina threatening innocent people who had no connection to my family's supernatural history. If she wanted a direct confrontation, I was going to give her one. Hit that like button if you're ready for the final showdown, because what happened next was the most terrifying night of my life. I spent that entire day preparing for what I knew would be a supernatural confrontation that could easily result in my death. I researched everything I could find about the historical Katerina de Santo, trying to understand not just how she had died, but who she had been as a living person. If I was going to face her directly, I needed to understand her motivations, her weaknesses, and hopefully find some way to reason with her or convince her to end the curse voluntarily. What I discovered in the Italian historical records was that Katerina had been more than just an innocent victim of superstition and greed. She had indeed been practicing what we would now call folk magic or herbalism, healing people with natural remedies, helping women with difficult pregnancies, and providing what amounted to early psychological counseling for people dealing with grief and trauma. In her time and place, these activities were enough to get her labeled as a witch, but from a modern perspective, she sounded more like a combination of a nurse, therapist, and midwife. Katerina had also been a mother. She had lost her husband and infant daughter to a cholera epidemic in 1892, and according to church records, she had spent the last years of her life trying to help other women avoid the same losses she had experienced. The accusations of witchcraft came from men who were threatened by a woman with knowledge, property, and independence, but also from women who were jealous of her skills and influence in the community. Understanding Katerina's history gave me an idea for how to approach the supernatural confrontation. She wasn't evil in the traditional sense. She was a woman who had been brutally wronged and had spent over a century consumed by rage and a desire for justice. Maybe, instead of trying to banish her or break her curse through force, I could find a way to give her what she actually needed: acknowledgement of the injustice she had suffered and a chance to finally find peace. Share this video if you want to see more stories about confronting supernatural entities, because my plan was either going to work or get me killed. That night, I prepared my apartment for what I hoped would be the final encounter with Katerina. I cleared all the furniture out of my living room, creating an open space in the center of the room. I set up candles in a circle, not because I believed in any specific ritual requirements, but because I wanted to create an atmosphere that would encourage direct communication. I placed the Ouija board in the center of the circle, along with printed copies of the historical documents I had found about Katerina's life and death. At exactly midnight, I sat down in the circle and called out to Katerina directly, "I know you're here. I know you're angry and that you've been trapped by your own curse for over a century. I want to help you find peace, but I need you to stop threatening innocent people. Let's talk about this." One person to another. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every candle in the circle flickered simultaneously. The temperature in the room dropped at least 20 degrees, and Katerina materialized directly across from me, more solid and real-looking than she had ever appeared before. She was wearing the same dark dress, but now I could see details I had never noticed: intricate embroidery on the sleeves, a small silver cross around her neck, and most importantly, tears streaming down her face. "You think you can help me?" she said, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. You think you understand what it's like to be murdered by people you trusted, to have your life's work destroyed, to be separated from your child forever. I chose my words carefully, knowing that this conversation would determine whether both of us. No, I don't understand and I can't what happened, but I can acknowledge that we're wrong, that you deserved better, and that your death was injustice should never have happened. I can also tell your story. Make sure people know who you really were instead of just remembering you as a curse or a supernatural threat. Katerina was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to determine whether I was being sincere or just telling her what she wanted to hear. The women who wore my ring, she finally said, they died because I wanted the world to feel the pain I felt when I died. Every time someone suffered because of me, I felt a moment of satisfaction, a brief sense that justice was being served, but it was never enough. The pain never went away, and the anger never faded. Comment below what you think happened next, because Katerina's next words changed everything. I'm tired, she continued, and for the first time since I had started seeing her, Katerina looked vulnerable rather than threatening. I've been angry for so long that I've forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. I want to see my daughter again. I want to rest, but I don't know how to stop being angry, and I don't know how to break a curse that I created with my dying breath. This was the opening I had been hoping for. Instead of trying to force Katerina to leave or attempting to break her curse against her will, I could help her choose to end it voluntarily. What if we worked together to break the curse? I suggested. What if instead of using the ring to cause more death and suffering, we used it to tell your real story and honor your memory properly? I could research your life, write about who you actually were, and make sure people remember Katerina DeSanto as a healer and a mother, not as a witch or a curse. Katerina's expression shifted, and for the first time I saw hope in her eyes instead of rage. You would do that? You would tell people the truth about what happened to me? Yes, I said, and I meant it completely. But I need you to help me break the connection between your spirit and this ring. I need you to choose to let go of the anger and move on to whatever comes next. What happened next was the most beautiful and terrifying supernatural experience I've ever witnessed. Katerina closed her eyes and began speaking in Italian. Not the angry, threatening Italian I had been hearing for weeks, but something that sounded like a prayer or a goodbye. As she spoke, the ruby in the ring began to glow, not with the angry red light I had seen before, but with a warm, gentle light that filled the entire room. The ring began to loosen on my finger. After weeks of being impossible to remove, it started sliding off easily, naturally, as if it had never been stuck at all. As the ring came off, Katerina's form began to fade, becoming more and more translucent, but she was smiling now, looking peaceful for the first time since I had started seeing her. Thank you, she whispered as she disappeared completely. Tell them I was more than my anger. Let me know in the comments if this ending gave you chills, because removing that ring was simultaneously the most relieving and most emotional moment of my life. Paragraph 5. Aftermath and lessons learned, 2,000 words. The moment the cursed ring slipped off my finger and fell to the floor of my living room, I experienced the most profound sense of relief and freedom I had ever felt in my life. It was like waking up from a nightmare that had been so vivid and terrifying that you weren't sure it was actually a dream until you opened your eyes and found yourself safe in your own bed. The supernatural weight that had been pressing down on me for 5 weeks was gone completely, and for the first time since inheriting the ring, I felt like myself again. But the story doesn't end there, because dealing with a supernatural curse leaves you with responsibilities and consequences that extend far beyond the immediate crisis. I had made a promise to Katerina DeSanto, and I intended to keep it, but I also had to figure out what to do with the ring itself and how to prevent this from happening to anyone else in the future. Subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more about how supernatural experiences can change your entire perspective on life, because what I learned from wearing Katerina's ring affected every aspect of how I understood reality. The first thing I noticed after removing the ring was how exhausted I was. I had been running on adrenaline and fear for over a month, barely sleeping, barely eating, constantly on edge from supernatural encounters that were draining my physical and mental energy. Once the immediate threat was gone, my body basically shut down for recovery. I slept for 16 hours straight, woke up long enough to eat something and call in sick to work again, then slept for another 12 hours. When I finally felt human again, I called Sarah to let her know that the supernatural threat to her safety had ended. She was understandably skeptical at first. How do you explain to someone that a ghost has agreed to stop haunting them? But when I described the final confrontation and Katerina's decision to break the curse voluntarily, Sarah admitted that she had felt a sudden sense of relief and safety at exactly midnight on the night of my supernatural negotiation. "It's the weirdest thing," Sarah said. "I was having that drowning nightmare again, but right at midnight, the woman in the dream just smiled at me and walked away. Instead of trying to drown me, she helped me out of the water and pointed toward what looked like a bright light in the distance. I woke up feeling peaceful instead of terrified, and I haven't had the nightmare since." Sarah and I didn't immediately get back together. We both needed time to process what had happened and figure out how to rebuild trust after I had basically abandoned her without explanation during a supernatural crisis. But eventually, we were able to have honest conversations about the experience, and our relationship actually became stronger because we had survived something genuinely traumatic together. Hit the like button if you want to hear about the research I did to fulfill my promise to Katerina, because what I discovered about her real life was both heartbreaking and inspiring. I spent the next several months researching Katerina de Santo's actual history, going far beyond the basic facts I had found during the crisis. I contacted historians in Italy, searched through church records, immigration documents, and newspaper archives, trying to piece together the full story of who she had been as a living person, rather than just focusing on how she had died. What I discovered was a woman who had been remarkably ahead of her time in terms of her knowledge and her commitment to helping other people. Katerina had been born in 1865 in a small village outside Naples, married at 18 to a man who respected her intelligence and supported her interest in herbal medicine and midwifery. When her husband and daughter died in the cholera epidemic of 1892, instead of retreating into grief, she had dedicated her life to preventing other families from experiencing the same losses. Church records showed that Katerina had successfully helped deliver over 100 babies, had treated countless people for various illnesses using herbal remedies that were actually medically sound, and had provided counseling and support for women dealing with domestic violence, unwanted pregnancies, and mental health issues. In the 1890s, this kind of work was revolutionary, especially for a woman operating independently without male oversight. The accusations of witchcraft that led to her death had come from a combination of sources: men who wanted her property, women who were jealous of her independence and skills, and religious leaders who were threatened by her popularity and influence in the community. The specific incident that triggered the mob violence was her successful treatment of a child who had been declared incurably ill by the local doctor. When the child recovered completely under Katerina's care, rumors spread that she had made a deal with the devil to perform supernatural healing. Comment below if you think Katerina's story sounds familiar in terms of how women throughout history have been persecuted for having knowledge and power, because the historical pattern is unfortunately very consistent. Understanding Katerina's real story helped me fulfill the promise I had made to her during our final confrontation. I wrote a detailed article about her life and death, focusing on her contributions to her community and the injustice of her execution. I submitted the article to several historical journals, and it was eventually published in a quarterly magazine that focuses on women's history in southern Italy. But more importantly, I used the story of my experience with the cursed ring to start conversations about how supernatural beliefs and fear of powerful women have been used throughout history to justify violence against women who didn't conform to social expectations. Katerina's curse had been born out of a very real injustice, and while her supernatural revenge wasn't morally justifiable, it was understandable as the response of someone who had been brutally wronged with no hope of earthly justice. The ring itself presented a unique problem. I couldn't just throw it away or donate it to a thrift shop, because there was always the possibility that someone else might put it on and reawaken whatever supernatural energy might still be attached to it. I also couldn't keep it, because even though Katerina had moved on, the ring had been a conduit for supernatural activity for over a century, and I didn't want to risk any residual effects. My solution was to take the ring to a local Catholic church and ask the priest to perform a blessing and purification ritual over it. I explained the situation honestly, that the ring had been associated with supernatural activity, and that I wanted to make sure it was spiritually cleansed before deciding what to do with it permanently. The priest, Father Martinez, was surprisingly open-minded about the whole thing and agreed to perform the blessing. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about how supernatural experiences can actually lead to personal growth and healing, because that's exactly what happened to me. After the blessing, the ring looked exactly the same physically, but it felt completely different. The weight was normal, the temperature was normal, and most importantly, there was no sense of supernatural presence or energy attached to it. It had become just a beautiful piece of antique jewelry with no spiritual significance beyond its historical value. I ultimately decided to donate the ring to a museum that specializes in Italian immigrant history. They were fascinated by the story of Caterina de Santo and agreed to display the ring as part of an exhibit about the challenges faced by Italian women who immigrated to America in the early 1900s. The museum display includes information about Caterina's real life and work, ensuring that people who see the ring will learn about her as a person rather than just as a supernatural story. The experience of wearing a cursed ring and confronting a supernatural entity changed my perspective on reality in ways that are still evolving. I'm not suddenly a believer in all things paranormal. I still approach supernatural claims with healthy skepticism, but I can no longer dismiss the possibility that consciousness, energy, and emotional trauma can persist beyond physical death under certain circumstances. More importantly, the experience taught me about the importance of listening to people who have been wronged, especially when those people are women whose stories have been distorted by fear, superstition, and misogyny. Caterina's curse was a manifestation of her unresolved trauma and her desperate need to be heard and understood. When I finally took the time to really listen to her story and acknowledge the injustice she had suffered, she was able to find peace and move on. Let me know in the comments what you think about this idea, that some supernatural activity might be connected to unresolved trauma and the need for acknowledgement and justice. The supernatural events I experienced were absolutely real. The physical manifestations, the temperature changes, the electronic malfunctions, and most convincingly, Caterina's direct communication with me. But the solution wasn't found in traditional methods of curse-breaking or spiritual warfare. The solution was found in empathy, historical research, and a genuine commitment to telling the truth about what had happened to a woman who had been silenced by violence over a century ago. If you're dealing with your own supernatural experiences, or if you've inherited family heirlooms that seem to carry more than just sentimental value, my advice is to approach the situation with both caution and compassion. Research the history, try to understand the human stories behind the supernatural activity, and remember that most hauntings are about unfinished business rather than random evil. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our supernatural content. Share your own experiences with family heirlooms or supernatural encounters in the comments below. I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your stories. And if this video helped you understand something about your own paranormal experiences, please share it with someone who might benefit from hearing about how supernatural problems can sometimes have very human solutions. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying supernatural experiences can teach us the most important lessons about empathy, justice, and the power of really listening to people who need to be heard.